Okay, welcome back. In this second video, we're going to dive right into how you would deploy a virtual APIC in a directly connected topology. If you recall at the end of the first video, I wanted to make it easy on myself by having the deployment details already at my fingertips as I go through the process, because it will just be easier to be ready to go with these things. The other thing I mentioned was suggesting that you pre-create your distributed virtual switch in vCenter and set up your port groups for use by the vAPIC. So that's what we're going to do first. I'm going to log into my vCenter and show you exactly how I've got things set up. Okay, so here we are logged into my vCenter console. Remember, I'm running 7.0 or later. I have already instantiated a standard distributed virtual switch, nothing exotic here from the VMware point of view. You do these all the time. I want to just remind you of a couple of important settings that we need to have in place for vAPIC to work properly. So I've already got the vAPIC DVS that I've created. Remember, the first thing is discovery protocol. This should either be Cisco Discovery Protocol or be turned off. It should not be LLDP. Remember, we need that packet to go from the vAPIC through the switch and reach the leaf and not get terminated in the middle. So that's the first setting that we want to check. Everything else is default. The next thing that I want to show you here is I've already created a port group called vAPIC Infra. That's just the name that I gave it. You can call it whatever you want. And you can, if you recall from the first video, I trunked 3 VLANs here. VLAN 0 for LLDP to work, VLAN 11, which was my choice for the in-band management VLAN, and then finally VLAN 3456, which was my choice for the infra VLAN that the APIC fabric needs to operate. With the exception of VLAN 0, my choice of 11 and 3456, if you recall, were my choices. You will pick the VLANs that are appropriate for your own environment. You don't have to follow what I did here exactly with my numbering. The other thing that I want to point out here is I have created, but I haven't deployed, I just created a policy called an LACP or lag policy here for my uplink ports. This is for getting ready down the road to do LACP active with VPCs for vAPICs 2 and 3. Now, I'm not going to deploy vAPICs 2 and 3 because I just don't have the resources, but I wanted to show you what you would need to do for your own environment. So all I did was I clicked New. You give it a name. In my case, number of ports was 2. The only thing you need to change is this mode to active. This will turn on LACP active. Now, I've already done that with my policy called lag vAPIC. So that's already set to go. Again, it's created but not consumed anywhere yet. We'll do that a little bit later. The next thing that I want to show you is the port group that I created, the vAPIC infra. And if I go into edit, the one thing that I want to show you, well, beyond the VLANs, which we already know about, but this teaming and failover. If you recall from video number 1, where we talked about the design considerations, the very first APIC is always going to choose the active standby approach from whichever ESX host it's on. So I've got uplink 1 listed as active and uplink 2 as standby. You can see down here I've got my lag policy. It's unused. As I mentioned earlier, it's there for me to consume at a later time. But this is what you need to set up in your own environment from a vCenter point of view. Okay, let's move on to the actual deployment of the very first virtual APIC. Now, I've already gone to cisco.com. I've downloaded the vAPIC OVA file from there, and I've copied it over to a content library. That's one way to do it. You can also put it on a web server or have it on a local machine and refer to it that way. Any one of those methods will work. So I'm going to go into my content library, and I'm going to look at my OVA templates. You can see right there is my installer. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select that and say new VM from this template. Again, this is all very standard VM deployment. It shouldn't be a mystery for you, but I'm showing it anyway. So I'm going to give this VM a name, vAPIC L2. This is the host that I have chosen to deploy my vAPIC. And again, standard deployment for VMware. Okay, reviewing the details, everything looks good here. Clicking next. Selecting storage. Remember in video number 1, the requirement was having fast storage. So that means SSD or NVMe. So pick, make sure that your ESX host has that appropriately. So I am going to pick, I think I have a local SSD drive on this particular host, and you can leave everything else as default. The next question you'll have to answer is the networks. Now, the virtual APIC, just like the physical APIC, is you have the out-of-band management network, which is critical at this step, and then you have the infra network. This is the link between the APIC and the fabric itself, where we'll do all this discovery and management. So I already have set up a port group ahead of time. Again, you would have already done this. I have a standard standard local vSwitch port group here that is on the network, where I'm going to assign the out-of-band management IP for this vAPIC. And then the second one is vAPIC infra. This is the port group that I showed you just a few minutes ago, where I had already created it on my DVS with those 3 VLANs trunked and all of the other settings. And everything else is normal, so we can click next. Finally, here you need to come up with the initial admin account password. I'm going to go ahead and put my password in, and then I'll set the management address and gateway, and then we'll be ready to deploy. Okay, password is good. Now let's go out of band IP address. Again, if I look at my cheat sheet, this is the IP address that I had set aside already, so there's no mystery here. And then, of course, the standard default gateway for that network, and we are good to go. We'll click next. Reviewing all of the details here of what we've done, everything looks good. We'll go ahead and click finish. Now this is going to take a few minutes to deploy, so I'm going to pause the video here, and then after the OVF is fully deployed, we'll actually power it on, and we'll go through the day 0 setup and the improved process that we've brought in 6.02. Okay, so my OVA has deployed. I have taken the liberty of powering it on. It's vAPIC L2, and it's ready to go. I also launched the console. You don't need to go into the console, but I just wanted to show you one thing, is when you launch the console, there's nothing to do here. It says go to the IP address of the out-of-band management IP that you set to complete the bootstrapping. So I pointed my web browser to the IP address, and this is the view that I get for the cluster bring up. We're going to enter the password that we set in the step before when we were deploying the OVA, and we'll begin setup. Here it's going to very gracefully and very visually walk you through the whole setup process and explain things as you go. The first question that I said you'll have to answer is, how do you want to attach your vAPICs? Directly attached, where we're basically layer 2 adjacent to the leaf, or over a layer 3 remotely attached network, where we've got our vAPIC somewhere else on a different network, some generic IP network in between, and some IP access to the spines for discovery and management. If you don't know which one of those is right for you, you can click on Help Me Choose, and we bring up a little bit more details about what each of those things mean and what you need. In my case, as I said, I'm going for the directly attached to the leaves, so at this point we'll click next. We're going to have to answer some of those basic questions that you used to have to do with the old console-driven day 0 setup. So in this case, I'm going to give it a name. I think we said we call this BCN Fabric 1. The next question here is, what's your cluster size? Now, a production environment will always have a minimum of 3 APICs, which will form a cluster, will share the work, will do high availability, etc. In my lab, this is my lab, I only have 1 vAPIC. So I can actually set this to 1, but again, this is not highly available. This is for lab testing only. You would not do this in production, but I'm doing it just to show you to go through in my lab. The next question is we need to select what's called a GIPO pool. This is a multicast range, and this is a range that we will allocate to APIC for use within the fabric anytime we have a need to handle broadcast, unknown unicast, or multicast traffic. The fabric will automatically configure itself for efficient movement of that traffic. I always take the default. It has to be a /15. I just take the default, and I don't make any difference there. This is in a dedicated VRF for infra. The next question is, well, the pod is already set to 1. This is my very first pod. It will always be 1. The next question is you need to give it a TEP pool. So a TEP pool is a pool of addresses, again, in a dedicated VRF just for the fabric to use, which is going to be handed out automatically by APIC for all of the VXLAN tunnel endpoints, for the leafs and spines and other things that the fabric needs TEP addresses for, it will come out of this pool. If you notice, it makes a recommendation, minimum /23, but generally speaking, you want this to be a lot bigger, /16. That way, as your fabric grows, you're never going to worry about running out of any possible TEP address that you might need. So I always go for a /16. In my environment, remember, in the cheat sheet, I chose the TEP pool 10.10.00/16. And then the last question is, what is the infrastructure VLAN? As I mentioned, this is the dedicated VLAN that exists between your APIC, your leaves, and your spines, and that they all talk to each other if they need to over this VLAN at layer 2. If you remember, I made the choice of 3, 4, 5, 6. Now there are some, let's say, there's some guidance around which VLANs are okay to pick and which ones are not. For example, I wouldn't pick VLAN 1, and I wouldn't pick anything over anything that's in what's called the reserved VLAN range. And I think the reason why we set 3914 here is because pretty much anything above that could possibly be a reserved VLAN for something connected to the fabric. So to be safe, probably pick 3914 or lower. I picked 3456. Go ahead and click next. In step number 3, we know it's a virtual. We know what the management IP is. Now we just need to give this virtual APIC a name. And I believe I said this was vAPIC BCN-01, right? Everything else is known in terms of controller ID number and pod number because this is the very first one. We don't have a choice. And of course, we are reminded of what the out-of-band management IP is. That's all we needed to do at this step. We can click Save and move on to the summary. I should also point out at this stage, this is where you would add vAPICs 2 and 3 to get them ready to join the cluster properly. As I mentioned earlier, in my environment, I only have one virtual APIC, so there's nothing for me to add to show you. But what you would do is click the Add Controller button that you see on the right, and you would put in the unique details of vAPIC 2 with its IP address and vAPIC 3 with its own unique IP address, and then you would go on to the next stage. Okay, this is the final view. It's always a good idea to triple check that all of the details that you've entered so far are as you want them, because as soon as I click deploy, these things are set. And the only way to go back and change these settings is to basically wipe this vAPIC and start over, which you don't want to do, once your fabric is up and running. So it's always a very strong suggestion to triple check your data, make sure everything's good before you click deploy. So in my case, all good. The next step here is it will show you a visual process of it bringing up this very first virtual APIC. So the bootstrap is already done. Here, it's going to go through a series of tasks, which you can see here are listed and what the progress is. Now, this will probably take, I don't know, let's say 3 to 5 minutes to kind of go through all the steps and spin up the services and load the UI. So I'm going to pause the video here, and about 5 minutes later, I'm going to come back and I will be, if everything goes well, this screen will have been completed, and it will be now showing me the welcome screen with the login prompt for the first vAPIC. Okay, so I've unpaused the video here real quick just to kind of show you what a proper process looks like. Everything is green, everything's 100%. All of the messages look reasonable, and we're on our way to loading the UI. So I'm gonna quickly pause the video again, and when we come back, we're going to be logged into the UI and ready to discover our fabric. Once the whole process has finished, what actually happened is it went to the login screen, but automatically logged me on because I had input the password as part of the process, and it remembered that password. So this is the very next screen that I saw. This is typical information that you will see when you first log in, and then it will ask you to start the ACI fabric setup. Now that's a whole other video to do like the basic fabric setup and do all of discovery. I'm going to once again pause the video and do my fabric discovery, and then when we come back, we'll have everything discovered. But then I want to show you some of the other settings around setting up VPC if you want for vAPICs 2 and 3. So if everything is working as it should and you want to go to discover the fabric, You would do that under Fabric Inventory and Fabric Membership. I'm going to go ahead and do all of the discovery and then bring the video back after that point in time. Starting the video again, I just wanted to show you that I've fully discovered my fabric. Everything is active, has a node name and a node ID. This is how your fabric should look. Again, my fabric is a lab, so I only have one spine and two leaves. You would have redundant spines at the very minimum. Let's also take a look at the command line for the leaves in this particular fabric. I am logged into leaf 2102 and I've issued the command show LLDP neighbor. And you can see I'm registering, I'm actually detecting that the vAPIC and I are exchanging LLDP messages. This is exactly how you wanted to see it. I'm going to switch over to the CLI of the other leaf real quick. So clicking into the other leaf 2101, issuing the same command. I don't see the vAPIC. Well, why is that? Well, if you remember when we were setting up the DVS and the port groups, we had the active link and the standby link. In leaf 2101, that's the standby link. And if I go back to leaf 2102, this is the active link, and this is where I would see. This is normal behavior. This is what you would see as well, which is why I show it in this video. Normally at this point, we would be completely done with vAPIC 1 in its setup. And then we would move on to deploying vAPIC 2 and 3. Now, I've only got one vAPIC in my environment, so I'm going to pretend that we're working on vAPIC 2 or vAPIC 3 to show you how to configure the LACP stuff and how you should configure your DVS as well in order for that to work. You don't have to use VPC, but if you want to use VPC, I figured I might as well show you how to set that up here. So the very first thing that I'm in is my fabric is fully discovered and everything is up and working. I need to go and create a special policy for my port channel. So I'm in the Fabric tab, Access Policies, and I've created my own new user-derived policy called LACP Active Individual. And the thing that you need to do here is select Mode LACP Active. That's what you want here, LACP Active. And then under the control settings, you want to get rid of this setting called Suspend Individual Port. So I'm going to actually click that. This is how you want yours to look for everything to be ready to go. The next step that I need to do is go and configure a VPC policy for the ports where my vAPIC ESX host is connected. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to pause the video and come back and show you that I've configured it. It's standard, VPC port configuration. I'll walk you through it after I've got it all set up. Let's actually configure the VPC stuff now using the new interface configuration wizard in ACI 6. So I'm in Fabric Access Policy still under Interface Configuration. I'm going to go ahead and say Configure Interfaces. In this case, I know I want VPC. It's going to ask me to select my leaf pair. Now I've already created this object, so I'm just going to select it. I've only got two leaves, and so this is a representation of those two leaves that will form VPC ID number 1. So I'll select that. It's going to say which interface for these switches. Now, in this case, you want them to be symmetrical. So in my environment, I've connected my ESX host uplinks to Ethernet 115 on each of my two leaves. Then down here, your interface policy group, I'm going to select this. I've created one. Again, I've created this object. If you don't have it created, you can click down here and create it on the fly. In my case, I've already got it done, so I'm going to go ahead and select it. Port channel member policy, I'm going to leave that as default. If I scroll to the bottom, you see these are the settings that are going to get pushed. It knows there's no existing configuration. I'm going to go ahead and click Save. And in just a minute, we will see my port channel interfaces will be configured. Now that I've deployed my VPC policies on the Fabric side of things, let's have a look at the state of the virtual port channel from the point of view of the leaves themselves. So I'm back to the CLI. I'm looking at leaf 2102, and I've issued the command show port channel summary. And if you recall, on Ethernet 1/15, that's where my ESX host is with the vAPIC. It's showing that there is a port channel. Right now, it says it's suspended and down. and it's a member port of I, which we look in the glossary here, it means individual. If I look over at the Leaf 2101, I see the exact same thing with a show port channel summary. So in order to complete this configuration, we need to adjust how we've configured the DVS to go and not use the active standby approach, but to use the lag policy that we created at the very beginning of this video. So let's switch our view back to vCenter, and let me show you what you need to do. Here we are back in my vCenter looking at the networking view, and here is my DVS that I'm using for my vAPIC. There are two things that we need to do to complete the configuration for my imaginary vAPICs 2 and 3 to use a virtual port channel condition. I'm going to first configure the port group. So here I'm going to right click and say Edit Settings. If you remember in the very beginning of the video, we had set up our active and our standby links. We also had a lag policy or an LACP active policy for the DVS configured, but we're not using it yet. Now we're gonna change that. So what I want to do here is I want to move my lag policy up into the active links, and I'm going to move uplink 1 to unused and uplink 2 as well. I'm going to move it down so it looks like this. So the only thing in the active group should be my LACP policy. Yeah, that's exactly how you want it to see. So we'll click OK. vCenter will make that change. There's one more thing that we need to do here, and that's at the DVS level itself and how it attaches to the host. So I'm going to right click and select Add and Manage Hosts. And because I have an existing host connected, I'm going to manage that particular host. I'm going to select it from the window. And here is where we need to make the change. Is right now we have our uplink set. So here I'm going to change and say, oh, there's my lag policy. I want this to be lag port 0 and this other one to be lag port 1. So it's the same physical VM NICs, but I'm just telling it now, use the lag policy, form a VPC channel with the leaves in my fabric, and everything will be good to go. So I'll click Next. I'm not going to change anything here, so I'm very quickly going through Next, and I'm going to finish that. It will make the change to the DVS, probably take a couple of seconds, and then we'll go back and we'll look at the state of the port channel on the leaves, and we'll see that, yeah, the port channel is up and everything is looking like it should if this were the case of vAPIC 2 or vAPIC 3. And here we are back into the CLI of BCN Leaf 2102. I've reissued a show port channel summary command. You can see my earlier one up here, but then you can see my later one. And we can see that our port channel is showing as a state of SU, which is switched and it is up in a port channel, and the member ports are P, which means everything is working as it should. Let's go and look at the other VPC member. This is the view of Leaf 2101, so it's the other member, and it's the exact same thing. I've issued a show port channel summary. Everything is up and looking as it should. So you would do that for vAPICs 2 and 3, and from that point on, you would have the full VPC active, LACP active, port level redundancy for those two APICs. Just a reminder, you're still going to leave your vAPIC number 1 in active standby, and then the other two can be in the VPC like I've simulated here. And that's it. You're done. You're ready to start using your fabric. That will conclude this video. In the next video, I will attempt to deploy vAPIC using the remote layer 3 option. But for now, I'll say thanks for watching and look forward to doing more videos for you.